was trapped in a mirror, and it couldn't be clear. She wanted to leave this place and get herself back to space.
Welcome back to me telling you how to mix things, for better or for worse. All right, so today we're going to go over some vocals, and potentially, if I can squeeze it in the time frame, I will also do some examples on what to do with lead guitar, as there's plenty of that in this. Again, I'm using Lapis Lazuli because it basically has every single element you could ever want to talk about. Naturally, mixing is not one size fits all, and that's the only reminder you're going to get because I think I waste too much time on that in other videos. So, listen here.
She was trapped in a mirror, and it couldn't be clear. She wanted to leave this place.
And you're probably looking at this here and being all like, yo, Cyril, why does that look like it's all clippy?
To be poised, she didn't recognize her home, and she wasn't returning her load. Now it seems that we're criminal. Some gems.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first is that I use a certain kind of EQ, or not EQ, compressor. And I'll show you what that is in just a moment. Let me take off. Oh, my goodness. Oh, okay. So I took off what is called a freeze on this, so you can see what I'm using. Now, I'm not ashamed. I do indeed. Oh, let me mount that on here. I do indeed use Melodyne. It is true. Not as much anymore, but I was actually sick when I recorded these vocals. I did not have a lot of time. I wanted to get the song out. I was proud of it. I was getting sick of it. So I did use a little bit of this. Now, what you'll notice, though, is that these still look pretty rough. That's because when I use Melodyne, it literally is just to make sure, like, if this note was down here, it's now up here. You don't have to use Melodyne. In fact, it's recommended that you don't. The better solution is to do what's called comping, and I will go over that in just a moment. First of all, oh my goodness. Okay. So, and I didn't do a lot of comping again. My voice only had like 1 or 2 takes in it, so I worked with what I had. So let's start with what some EQ settings that you can use for this. And I've actually changed a couple of my stances on this, but again, I'm showing you how it went for Lapis Lazuli. So I'm going to show you this first. This is, of course, a preset on the EQ plugin I use that's called Classic EQ, and it from T-Rax. And I think this one's actually free, because I think if you download T-Rax, you get the metering and the EQ for free. So you can go to ikmultimedia.com and get this. And I like the way it sounded on vocals for a long time. I started using a different process very recently, which I might go over in another mixing video, because I actually have a mix with live drums now that's going to be coming out next week, I do believe, from the posting of this video. And so you can see that. But one thing that I always do with vocals, and in fact, actually, if I remember correctly, the original preset that this is based off of literally has the drop off here. But honestly, for me, male vocals, and especially female vocals, do not need anything below 150 to 200 hertz. There's not really much there for it unless it is a bass singer. But I mean, for a song like this, I'm singing all up here, so I don't really need, anything below that. Do boost a little bit of around the 150 range. Again, don't want anything below 150. But 150 is actually a nice sweet spot if you need some beef to the vocals. And then you kind of balance that out by boosting a lot really high up, so you get some nice sibilance. Again, what you want to make sure you do is have a low Q. Otherwise, you're doing something like that, which looks ridiculous. But that depends on your EQ. I will show you, I actually will show you the alternate way right now. What I do now, actually, and I find to be more effective, and I'll show you the difference, actually. So let me reload that preset that I made up a bit ago. And I will remove anything other than the EQ for now. This also has some EQ on it, but I think that was, yeah, okay. That was just for problem frequencies, which is actually solved in this one. So what you'll notice over here is a little different. So let me turn this off and you can hear, just say this.
There was a deafening noise, warning Earth to be poised. She didn't recognize her home, and she wasn't returning hollow.
Okay, so what you notice about that first off is that it's really weighty. It has some more stuff going on, but it does have the presence that you still want. Now let me just try this EQ here.
There was a deafening noise, warning Earth to be poised. She didn't recognize her home, and she wasn't returning hollow. Now it seems that we're criminal.
Let me do this real quick too. Uh-oh. Yes, there we go. To turn it up a couple of notches.
There was a deafening
Because it's not
noise,
boosting as much.
warning Earth to be poised. She didn't recognize her home, and she wasn't returning hollow.
Now see with this, which might seem counterintuitive, but what this is basically the reverse of what the other EQ was doing. And that being that it was boosting frequencies instead of cutting them. Now, most people will say offhand that unless you're working with analog equipment, you don't really need to, do the thing that cutting is always cleaner than boosting. That's not necessarily the case anymore. However, if you're like myself and many others, and you're recording in an imperfect environment, the same thing still applies, because if you're removing things from this signal, you're less likely to add, gross artifacts and everything else. And this is, again, just a preset. Well, what I use presets for is a starting point. So it just kind of like gets the little bit of the tedium out of it, and I only have one knob to worry about. And the reason is because around 2,000 hertz on most male vocals is the nasal tone. So you kind of want to get rid of that a little bit because it's a little cutting. It doesn't sound too good to most ears. So that's why you want to get rid of that. And then when it comes to the low end, now that one was boosting 100 and had a bit of more of a cutoff. Now sometimes I do take this filter here and push it a little bit more. But generally what I've found is if you cut around 200, that gets out of the way of the guitars and everything else. But you still have weight from the vocals coming from just below that. And this is something I learned in between me making this series and other things. And you get some of the beef around the 500 hertz, 1 kilohertz range, which is where the vocals really sit, as you've probably seen from the previous entries in this. And I'm always dipping out the 1,000 hertz range from other things. Now, that's how lead vocals go. There's a lot more you can do with lead vocals. I'm not doing any of those techniques with this one because I didn't feel, it wasn't something I wanted to do. What you can do sometimes is, add extra effects, but I'm going to show you those effects here with the deliciousness that is my harmony vocal tracks. So bear with me for a moment. Now, the harmony vocal tracks obviously don't add too much, but I think you got a glimpse of those effects chains and how just giant they are. Why is that? Well, for one, again, I was sick, so Melodyne was used actually very liberally. Now, what I like to do with background vocals is actually I use a little heavier on the pitch control. That way, they're just really tight sounding, really locked in with the rest of the background. Because when you're singing and you're a little bit out of pitch, it actually sometimes serves as a way to bring the voice out a little bit more from the rest of what's going on. And with that, you get some benefit. However, that's not always the case. So let's hear the background vocals by themselves, really. Now, let me just actually do this. Undo. There you go. Okay. Yeah.
Have a little faith in me. You don't have to Be trapped, have to fight it, have to fight it, have to fight it to be free. Let
All right.
yourself believe.
So if you're wearing headphones, you'll notice two things. One, they're very affected. I have many effects going on these. A chorus, and actually another chorus, and a compressor. Compressed to heck, by the way. Lots of ratio, realistically more than vocals ever need. Just driving the heck out of it. Lots of compression. EQ, so it's not as much taking up the middle space, so it stays out of the way of the main vocals. This is like no low end, really just kind of getting the note in there for the vocals, and just like all like super processed. And so with the chorus effects here, these allow for some stereo width, and meaning that it doubles like the signal and like adds a couple of effects to it, and so you hear it in more than one ear. So the better way to do this, honestly, is to record yourself singing twice, and then you can have both sides. But I'm using excuses. I was lazy. But if you only have tracks to work with and you have a mix, well then guess what? That's why you can make this nice big sound without having to go too crazy. Oh. Why is my lead vocal not playing?
Lazuli, way home finally. Lazuli.
Sure. So for some reason my lead vocal is not playing. I don't fully understand why. But that is the case. So you know what we'll do? BRB. No, don't save the changes. Why would I want that? Fortunately, the makers of this program recognize that if when you set it to autosave, it makes an autosave copy. That way, and it still references all the same files. So what you can do is you open the autosave copy and just resave it over your old track if your program crashes. So let's go back and listen to the whole thing together, in the better way here. So.
To end it all, Lapis Lazuli. You found your way home finally. Lapis Lazuli. Oh, but when you got there, what did you see? Have a little faith in me.
So the biggest thing to notice in that final product is that the backing vocals, well, they could actually probably have come up just a touch. They weren't really present, but you can kind of hear them. If you're listening for those notes, you hear them, and it just helps back up the lead vocals. Unless you're Queen, that's basically what you want to do. So. And that was a really quick overview, but basically what you want to do with lead vox, as a quick sum up, vocals in general, is don't have them doing anything in the low end, and as good as your low pass filter may be on your microphone, whatever, you'll probably still run into some of those issues that a lot of people do when it comes to vocals, and you won't be able to, you'll have a lot of extra low end that you don't need. It'll muddy up the rest of your mix. Cut out things like you are already cutting out, if you're using the techniques I've been teaching you here, you are already cutting out small things in the guitars to make them, like the vocals sit on them a little better. So you want to make sure you cut down from different spots in those. Probably not quite as much as I was doing in this example. Usually you're doing a little less, like 2 decibels or whatever at like 200 hertz and 2000 hertz respectively, but that's the way that goes. And so with backing vocals, either record them twice and make them very airy by getting rid of a lot of the mids and just accentuating the highs, no lows whatsoever, no body really to those vocals, unless you're going for several people. And doubling them is honestly the best way to get them to stick out without overtaking. But barring that, get a good chorus plugin that has a good stereo field, set it to be as stereo and ridiculous sounding as possible, and go down from there. And to be honest with you, in a lot of cases, the backing vocals can be hellishly affected and still sound fantastic. So there you are. Alternate options with lead vocals, by the way, is you can literally just have the vocalist sing it twice or yourself sing it twice, and that automatically creates a really cool doubling effect that sometimes helps it stick out through really heavy mixes a little bit better. I don't usually employ that. I don't employ many effects on lead vocals at all. I love a very pure tone, but that's not to say it's wrong to do that at all. In fact, some people prefer that and will do it whenever they can. So nothing else in that. Last thing before I let you go, you'll notice right here that there's a lot going. Let me make this a little bit easier to look at by printing them out. I have a volume and a reverb send because for this part, I wanted it to be blank except for one thing as far as reverb tails go. So I just cut down the reverb like almost all the way. And sometimes, and actually what I've been reading is that you want to do this a lot more than I was at this point in my mixing career, is use automation, which if you can, obviously some DAWs do not, but mine does, where you literally can either hit record and it will record your changes you make to your volume knob, or if you'd prefer volume knob. Or you can actually just draw, different settings on it. I, of course, don't want to do that. That would be ridiculously loud. But you can also, zoom in a little bit so that it's a little easier to see, etc. So, yeah, that is the best way that I have found to get a vocal sounding really good. Compressing it, by the way, very, very intensely. That's one of the things I like to do for sure. I found this preset actually on the brick wall limiter from T-Rex. Yeah, it's pretty intense. It's driving the input really harshly and then having a pretty low output ceiling. That's why it looked like it was clipping. But because of the way this operates, it's not clipping unless it's a complete brick, and it's really helped my vocals sit in a little bit. Maybe that's cheating, but just make sure the compressor doesn't sound too obvious, and the cleaner you can get it, try using a limiter instead of a compressor and see how it sounds. Otherwise, 4-to-1 ratio is excellent. A little bit less than that, a pretty good attack, really short attack, and then a nice wide release, as you can see here, will do you very well. So that is it for vocals, and I will see you probably next month for the next Lapis Lazuli.